everybody. Welcome back to Office Hours Politics Edition. Let's start with a sentence you've heard 100 times. The United States promotes democracy around the world. This sentence is repeated so often, it is treated like a fact, not a claim. But today, we're going to do something very simple and perhaps uncomfortable. We are going to ask, what happens when people abroad actually vote the wrong way? Because here's the pattern we're going to trace over the next few minutes. When elections abroad threaten U.S. economic, military, or ideological interests, democracy suddenly becomes optional. This episode is called Coups Are Us, because that's essentially how U.S. foreign policy has operated for over a century now. If election results are favorable, celebrate democracy. If election results threaten power, destabilize, overthrow, replace. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but it's not conspiracy, surprisingly. This is documented history, declassified memos, congressional investigations, and admissions by U.S. officials themselves. Let's talk about how democracy promotion became one of the most effective propaganda frames for imperial intervention. Now, before we get into coups, we need theory. Because the U.S. doesn't see democracy the way normal people do, political theorists argue that liberal states treat democracy as instrumental, not morally. Meaning, democracy is good when it produces acceptable outcomes. As Hannah Arendt warned, modern empires don't rule through open tyranny. They rule through administration, legality, and narrative. And the U.S. narrative is simple. We don't interfere. We protect freedom. But protection often looks like sanctions, media manipulation, funding opposition groups, bribery, military coups. Democracy is allowed as long as it doesn't challenge capital empire or U.S. hegemony. Let's start with the template, the blueprint, if you will. Mohammed Mossadegh, Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. In 1951, Iran democratically elected Mohammed. His crime? He nationalized Iran's oil, which had been controlled by British and American companies. This was not communism. It was economic sovereignty. The response? In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated a coup, bribed politicians, paid protesters, manipulated newspapers, destabilized the economy. Operation Ajax overthrew a democratically elected leader and installed the Shah, a U.S.-backed dictator. This single coup destroyed Iranian democracy, radicalized Iranian politics, and directly contributed to the 1979 Iranian Revolution. And the CIA later admitted it. This is just declassified information. Now let's go to Latin America. Jacobo Arbenz. Arbenz was democratically elected in Guatemala. He implemented land reforms. The problem? The land belonged to United Fruit Company, a U.S. corporation. So what happened? The CIA labeled him a communist, armed opposition forces, ran psychological warfare campaigns, and forced his resignation. The result? A military dictatorship, decades of civil war, and genocide against indigenous peoples. Democracy died because it threatened corporate profit. Now we can move on to Chile. Salvador Allende. Allende was democratically elected. He was a socialist. The U.S. response, as Nixon put it, quote, make the economy scream. The CIA funded opposition, stabilized markets, encouraged military takeovers, and in 1973, Augusto Pinochet seized power. The result? Mass executions, torture, neoliberal shock therapy. Democracy lost, capital won. By this point, I really hope that the pattern is clear. The U.S. interfered in Italy, Indonesia, Brazil, Congo, Dominican Republic, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. Elections were manipulated, leaders were overthrown, dictators were installed, all in the name of stopping communism. But the real fear wasn't ideology, it was independence. After the Cold War, the rhetoric changed. No more communism. Now it's human rights, anti-terrorism, stability, and democracy promotion. But the tactics all stayed the same. Look at Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Venezuela, Haiti. Elections are supported only if the result aligns with U.S. interests. If not, sanctions, delegitimization, regime change. This history matters because the U.S. still claims to be a moral authority. It lectures the world on democracy while undermining elections abroad, supporting authoritarian allies, criminalizing dissent. As Noam Chomsky, my beloved Noam Chomsky, but I seen his picture in the Epstein files, and I'm really shocked as to what's going on. That's a side note. I've been thinking about him for days. Anyways, he said for decades, the U.S. supports democracy as long as it produces the right answers. So, when you hear politicians talk about defending democracy, ask whose democracy? Who benefits? At what cost? Because history shows us clearly the U.S. doesn't overthrow governments because they're undemocratic. It overthrows them because they are. Sorry, you guys, I feel so passionately about this. I didn't mean to scream. Anyways, that has been this little short, sweet episode called Coups Are Us. And if you guys are interested, I can talk about every single country on that list. I could do a whole episode dedicated to just the Middle East because it's really crazy and scary, guys. But I don't want to alarm anybody. Anyways, until next week, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay curious, stay politically aware, and remember, democracy is only sacred when it's unconsented. Disgusting. Democracy's fake. Okay, bye, guys.